2nd and 3rd John. Close the door and open the door. These show two different sides of the same coin, and that coin is walking in the truth. So a little overview of the teaching. I'm going to give a background of both of the books together. Then when I dive into the text, I'm going to show the differences between the books. And then when I come to the end and I pick one passage, I'm going to summarize to both books again. So let's dive in. Here's some historical background on both of the books. Now, the author we can see in verse 1 is the elder, and most people believe that this is John the disciple. And if it is, that means by now he's about 80 or 90 years old, meaning he's, well on his way. But he is probably one of the few people to have actually met Jesus, the human Jesus, left on earth, because this was about 50 or 60 years after Jesus had Jesus' ascension. The date was also around 80s or 90s AD, and at this time, the false religion Gnosticism was really growing. And Gnosticism was a false teaching that believed that the body was evil and the spirit was good. They also believed in the pursuit of salvation through hidden knowledge. But it wasn't just these false teachers that were traveling around at the time. There was also Christian missionaries, traveling and teaching as well. The recipients of these books are two different recipients. The recipient of 2nd John is called the elect lady. Now, there's not much more else we know about this lady, but the word elect, or some translations say chosen, is not a specific term to her. Ephesians 1:4 says, even as he has chose us in him before the foundation of the world. So the elect basically just means Christians. And that's all we really know about this lady. And it's presumed that she's probably some kind of leader of a house church at the time. The other one, 3rd John, is written to Gaius. And I think it seems like there's 4 Gaiuses in the Old Testament, but it mentions that they're all from different places. So I think this Gaius is a different one again. And again, we don't know too much about this Gaius apart from what the text says. And it says, he walks in the truth, he's hospitable, he is faithful, and he walks in love. And that's all we really know about him. But, fun fact, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, the innkeeper is called Gaius, and I'd imagine it's after this guy because of his hospitality. Let's have a look at these two books and figure out what's the same and what's different about them. I've highlighted these 4 passages in each book because they're so similar, they're almost written word for word. So 2nd John and 3rd John, verse 1, says, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth. That's 2nd John. And 3rd John says, the elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. So you can see the similarity. The next one, verse 4 in 2nd John and verse 3 to 4 in 3rd John. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And that passage in 3rd John, for I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified of your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. So you can notice the trend. Verse 9 in 2nd John and verse 11 in 3rd John has this similar theme of saying, if you do this, you are of God, and if you don't do this, you are not of God. And then verse 12, the last verse in 2nd John, and verse 13 and 14, the last verse in 3rd John, say, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you face to face so that our joy may be complete. So we can see all these verses are almost identical, and that helps back up the point that it was written by the same person. And this is why I'm teaching these two books together. it's not that they're so small that I couldn't fill out a teaching, or there's not enough content to do a whole teaching, but because after reading and studying these books, I really believe that even though these letters are two different letters sent to two different people, I believe it's the same message, but coming from different angles. And you'll see what I mean now. In 2 John, verse 10, which is kind of like a key verse for the whole book, it says, "If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works." Okay, so what is this teaching that John's talking about? Well, if we skip back a couple of verses, it tells us what the teaching is. It says, "Love one another, and this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it." So that's the teaching. John is saying, if anyone comes to you and isn't bringing this teaching of love and these commandments that Jesus told us, do not accept them. Do not be hospitable to them. He's telling the house church to deal with hospitality, not to receive these people who aren't receiving Jesus Christ and not abiding in the teaching of Christ. Application for us today, okay, it's probably unlikely that we're going to get false teachers turning up in our house, and it's probably unlikely that we're going to get false teachers turning up in our church. But it got me thinking, what things do we allow to come into our lives? What things do we allow to come into our hearts that are false teachings, false doctrines, false things that the world will teach, but it is the opposite of the Bible? Do we believe, do we let our worldview be changed and led astray by the world and the things of the world, or do we let the law of Christ teach us our worldview? Okay, let's move on to 3 John. A key verse for 3 John is verse 8. It says, "Therefore we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers in the truth." Okay, so again, who are the people like these? If we go a few verses up, we get to see who these people are. He says in verse 5 to 7, "Beloved, it is a faithful thing that you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles." So again, this is dealing with hospitality. But this time, he's saying, how does your church support and show hospitality to these traveling teachers, these Christians who are not accepting payment from the Gentiles, but are going out anyway without receiving payment just to preach the good news for the sake of the gospel? He's saying, how can we support these people? How does this apply for us today? Well, I would say it's fairly similar to what it was then. How do we support fellow believers or fellow ministries in Christ? We are all called to the Great Commission, to go to the nations and preach the good news. Okay, not all of us will physically leave our own town and go and preach to other nations, but we are all still called to this same calling, and so maybe our job is not to go to these nations, but maybe it's to support people who are going to these nations. Or all of us can make disciples where we are, in our spheres of influence. Whatever we're doing, whether in school, college, uni, if we have a job, just on our streets, we can all make disciples and we can all preach the good news wherever we are. And this is what 3 John is saying to us. So, little summary of each book. 2 John, he writes to encourage the elect lady, walk in the truth by not receiving false teachers. 3 John, he says, he writes to encourage Gaius, walk in the truth by showing hospitality to the saints and showing hospitality to Christian teachers. So to summarize both books, John writes to encourage the readers of his letters to show their love for God and to show their love for the Son by being obedient to the commandments of Scripture, to love one another, and to love God with all of their lives. So I've picked one passage in 2 John, which I feel like helps make this summary. The passage is 2 John, verse 5 to 6, and I've just wrote some of it here. It says, "And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing a new commandment, but the old one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so you should walk in it." Okay, so I've made an observation of this connection. Not a new commandment, but the commandment that you've had from the beginning. So how do we interpret this passage in the context? What does John mean by not an old commandment? Well, the Old Testament had 613 laws. That's a lot of commandments. But it can be summarized in 2 commandments. The first one is in Deuteronomy 6, 4 to 5, and it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might." And the second commandment can be summarized in Leviticus 19:18, which says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." So 613 laws can all be summarized by love God and love people. But that's the Old Testament. What does the New Testament say? Well, did you know that the New Testament has even more commandments? It has 1,050 commandments. But when Jesus was asked, "Teacher, what's the greatest commandment?" he said in Matthew 22, 37 to 39, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." So these commandments were the same throughout the whole of the Old Testament and the whole of the New Testament. Yes, the context changed over the years. Yes, the covenants even changed from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. But the commands stayed exactly the same. How can we apply this to our lives today? Well, I chose this timeless truth. God gives commands to his children because he is a loving father. So if the commandments didn't change over thousands of years, from Moses to the time of Jesus, I'm going to suggest that those commands still apply today. Yes, we live in a very different world to what they did then. Yes, it was nearly 2,000 years ago. And yes, some of the commands will need to be interpreted in the context to find out what was going on at the time. But the good news of the gospel is still the same. The 2 greatest commandments are still the same. Love God and love people. But it's not only these 2 commandments that are useful for us. I would suggest that the 1,050 commandments in the New Testament are also good for us. Think of a parent telling a child not to touch a fire, or not to pick up a sharp knife, or not to play around a busy road. Why would a parent do that? It's not because he's angry or because he doesn't want the parent to have fun. It's because he loves that child and he cares for that child and he doesn't want that child to get hurt. It's the same with God. He loves us and he knows better than us because he's God. 1 John 5 verses 2 to 3 says, "By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. Because this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome." And that's what really challenged me in these books, that these commandments are not burdensome. How do we walk in the truth? It's by following the New Testament commandments and the Old Testament commandments. summarized like this: love God and love people.